good morning and a warm welcome to the CNBC Africa special. We're coming to you live from the city of Cape Town, where the World Economic Forum on Africa is currently taking place. Now, the reason for our convening this early in the morning is to take a look at the role of mobile broadband in enabling, as well as being a developer in enhancing and conquering the challenges that the continent faces with regard to socio-economic ills. I've got a wonderful group of panelists with me who are going to walk us through how we can find practical and meaningful steps to address these challenges while unleashing the power of mobile broadband. I'd like to introduce the Honourable Minister of Telecommunications and Postal Services in South Africa, Mr. Siyabonga Cwele. Following him is Mr. Mortimer Hope. He's the Director for Africa at GSMA. We've got next to him is Dr. Alison Gillwald. She's the Director of Research for ICT Africa. We've also got Mr. Vuyani Jarana. He is Chief Officer at Vodacom Business. And not forgetting Mr. Jamie Drummond, co-founder of One.org. We are not alone, ladies and gentlemen. We do have a wonderful group of audience members joining us today. Some of them are stakeholders and individuals involved in the mobile broadband fraternity who will be participating in our discussion, suggesting their questions and commentary to the panel and even exchanging ideas amongst themselves. You too can also join our conversation via social networks using the hashtag MBB4Dev. Now that's MBB4DEV, Mobile Broadband for Development. Without wasting any more time, let's get into the agenda for the day, as our time is limited. As we heard in the opening address from Mr. Hope with regard to sub-Saharan Africa as well as the penetration of broadband. It has grown significantly over the last 5 years, but sub-Saharan Africa is still the least penetrated region in the African continent. Mr. Hope, if we start off with you, this clearly presents a significant opportunity. How do we get there?
Well, the GSMA is committed to having widespread connectivity services, not just voice. In the past, the focus was on voice services, but we've realized that the power of the internet is very powerful. So we want voice and data to be everywhere in Africa. And the challenge is, not just in Africa, but worldwide, we'd like to connect the 2 billion people by 2020. Now, you've asked, how do we get there? There are a number of things we can do. We need to ensure that the networks are available. We need to ensure that content is available, that people can view and create content themselves, the local content. And we need to ensure that the devices, the end-user devices, are affordable. So those are the things we need to concentrate on.
Before it gets into the hands of consumer, obviously it does need to start off with some kind of valuable infrastructure that develops this. Honourable Minister, let's start off with you, because clearly you are probably the man who has not only the checkbook, but also the Bible with regard to the policy and framework in directing this kind of development.
Thank you, Hope. And the real thing, as my colleague has said, that if you look in a South African situation, the mobile penetration is well over 153%. But we know some of our citizens have got more than one phone. But what is good when you're looking at households which are having a functional cell phone, over 93% of the households do have functional cell phone. So it is a revolution in terms of connectivity and communication. What is key to us is because we're in a program of rolling out the infrastructure now, practically broadband. Our internet penetration is just around about 50%. We have to increase that quite significantly. Our broadband penetration is around 17%. And we know that if we increase the broadband rollout, I think all the studies have shown that will have quite a significant impact on our growth as a country and as a continent. So that's where the focus of the government, that we must roll out the infrastructure, particularly the government working together with the private sector. We are trying to create an enabling environment. In the South African situation, we have just gone through a policy review where the whole industry, civil society, were contributing as the main inputs on what should be the overarching ICT policy, particularly concerning the take into account that now we're in this digital phase. So So those are the things we're doing, and the suggestions which we're considering now from the government, they're coming from the industry and the civil society as a whole. To us, what is going to be critical is the issue of skills, taking into account that we come from apartheid past, so that people must have access and be able to utilize these tools. Now that because we know most of our people have got access to cell mobile. So how do we empower them in terms of skills? Just basic skills and up to level skills. The other critical element, because we have taken a decision that we have to roll out, this broadband will be stimulated by rolling out e-governance services, which will mean people will be stimulated to access government service online, and we should mobilize society really for the uptake of broadband. The devices and the cost are going to be a limiting factor. That's what we have to engage with industry. And the level of manufacturing, particularly of these devices in Africa. When I say we shouldn't import them, we import those which come at a good price, but we must start the localization, not only of content, but also of devices. In South Africa, we have got the capacity to manufacture, and some of the countries in Africa, they're increasing their capacity for industrialization. That's what is going to be critical for us. Even if we just manufacture a screen, or even a cover, that would be a good starting point, because that's why we're saying, when we're saying as South African, we're open for business, as Africa, we're open for business. The Agenda 2063, which talks about the integration of Africa, brings these opportunities for the global players to really invest in Africa.
Minister, you mentioned the participation of private sector players. Mr. Jarana, you're probably well positioned to give us your view on these engagements as well as if we're working and moving in the right direction.
Yes, I think it's very important, the interaction between government and private sector. You all understand that the private sector has their core business in telecoms, being able to rollout, provide connectivity. However, there are key areas where government needs to be a little bit more agile, pan-African, across the continent. For example, the difficulties in rolling out in some of the remote areas around energy, access roads, just the logistics of moving equipment from different parts of the country, and also imports, how you deal with customs and exercise. Those are some of the things we expect government to be a little bit more agile in facilitating that. And there are countries in the continent where it's a lot more difficult to ship radio equipment from one province to another. You have to use airline and so on in country. So facilitating access roads, the inputs around power, being an issue that also drives the cost of delivering services to the last mile areas, which are not in the metropoles of the various African countries. These are the areas where we would expect government to be a lot more active in it, but also key decisions that are about spectrum decisions, how you make that decision quicker to be able to, because the lifeblood of mobile industry is about spectrum. If those decisions are made quicker, faster, and in a way that drives the broader economic, socio-economic agenda, this becomes very important. So, and I also want to mention that also the view around subsidies in terms of supporting last mile coverage. So there has to be a new thinking. Instead of talking about subsidizing operators to go and build infrastructure, I think that government should focus a lot more on demand side of the equation. If there is demand, industry will invest. There are clinics, there are hospitals, there are schools, there are police stations, those villages, but also there are communities who are maybe indigent. If government focuses the subsidy model to subsidize demand or to support demand, industry will invest. So I think there are a number of things that needs government and business to be in the same room to find new models, not the traditional approaches of making sure that the last mile coverage is successful in the continent itself.
Dr. Gillwald, to follow up on Mr. Jarana's sentiments regarding these new models that we need to look at, it clearly makes it very difficult, especially from a policy and framework perspective, to not only keep up with the technological changes, but also be forward-looking to anticipate further developments that you're not even aware of.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, traditionally there's always been a policy lag. But in this sector particularly, and with the dynamism of the sector at the moment, it's almost impossible to anticipate what is going to happen and therefore choose winners and losers in terms of technology, in terms of what kind of licenses you need, etc. So I think increasingly what people are indicating what works best is for the state to create as enabling an environment as possible for innovation, for delivery of services, etc. We know that with mobile voice services, mobile phones, more was achieved around universal service by opening up the market and allowing mobile operators to deliver these services. Of course, that isn't a sort of abdication of the state. We know that in infrastructure industries, it's very difficult to get truly perfect competitive markets. And so you do require regulation, effective regulation, enforcement of competition. Otherwise, you get the very high prices that we've got across Africa, or have had historically across Africa, where operators have been very ineffectually regulated. I think over the last 5 years, we've seen a change in that. We've seen introduction of mobile termination rates on voice services that have driven down prices. We've got fabulously low prices in Kenya, in Ghana, which has a competitive market, so that works more strongly. It doesn't need as much regulation. But even those voice models, those old models that we were using, present a whole new challenge as we go into a broadband environment where we've got, we require greenfield investments in next generation networks, and we know that neither the state, I think Minister Cwele will agree that he actually doesn't have a checkbook, or if he has a checkbook, it's empty. And that the state simply doesn't have, certainly not even South Africa, but certainly not the states of sub-Saharan Africa, have the kind of investments you need to roll out broadband networks. And so they'll require these collaborations between the public and private sector. And in different countries, in the different political economies, you'll need different kind of models. So I think we can look at best practice in the rest of the world, but trying to simply take best practices from mature markets in the north and trying to simply apply them, not necessarily impose them, but apply them in developing markets where you don't necessarily have legacy copper networks, or you certainly don't have much in the way of new technologies available. We have to look at these new partnerships. That being said, I think, just going to your earlier discussion, absolutely demand stimulation is the thing. That's what will get private investment, is where the economic opportunities are there. And I think certainly there's much greater scope for that. I think if you look at the profitability of the mobile operators across the continent, it's extraordinary. I mean, in any other industry, you would be happy to settle for EBITDAs of half of what we're seeing and profitability of half of what you're seeing. On the other hand, that is what has delivered this wonderful communication revolution. So you don't want to, kill the goose that's laid the golden egg. But I think you want to look at how you can make these markets more efficient so that people can afford services, which will drive demand. Because I think, subsidies are the last resort. Subsidies are what you want to mop up those people who can't afford affordable, cost-based services. So I think the real challenge for us from a policy and regulatory point of view is getting, efficient markets, effective markets, with prices that are as affordable as, not affordable, but are cost-based. Once one's got that, in most African countries, there will still be a group of people that will simply not afford services. We can't, once your services are cost-based, you can't expect operators to bring their costs down any further. And broadband costs money, and it's simply not affordable for large numbers of Africans. So these figures that we see, I think, just to go to the very first point that you started about, there was a lot of reference to figures in the beginning. 40% mobile penetration only across the continent, 130% mobile penetration across the continent. And just to flag, because I think it is an important point and important aspect of the absence of evidence-based policy across the continent, is that there is a kind of political economy of information. And the fact that the inequalities that one sees in Africa are masked by these kind of aggregated global figures, of 115% or whatever it is. And the only way one can get this data is actually to do proper measurements. Now, there are a whole lot of interesting things, and one can speak about that later.
So we need data for data.
We absolutely do, because otherwise, we talk evidence-based policy, but we actually don't know. We don't actually know what is affordable. We don't actually know how many people we know we definitely don't have 113% penetration because we all know people who don't have a service. So we know that that's not the case. But even more importantly, as we move into the kind of post-voice, the broadband world with all the fabulous services and things that are available, the issues of inequality that are masked by just having access to a phone become more apparent. So people don't have, as the Minister was saying, if people don't have the skills, don't have the education to optimize those fabulous services, then they're not going to be able to equitably enjoy the benefits of ICTs. That's a real challenge.
I'd like us to come to Mr. Drummond for a moment, because clearly the topic about demand was alluded to early on in this conversation by Mr. Jarana, and clearly you, that individual who deals with this demand, because you address the socio-economic ills that we're hoping that broadband will be able to capitalize and obviously find solutions for. Are you finding that the current structures that we have, as we've alluded to, infrastructure policy, the models that are currently in place, are they working at the moment? And from your perspective, where does it need to change?
Well, I think the short answer is not yet, and not enough. But there's a lot of promising signs that need quite urgent scaling. And that's a tremendously exciting opportunity, but I would not be at all complacent about where we are right now. So there's so many things that have been said by the panel to pick up on. One is about the last mile, about the problems of data, and a couple of data points on that, or questionable data points on that, referring to the wider issues of development policy. So according to the best available data, there are 414 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who live under $1.25 a day, 414 million. But that data point depends upon surveys from countries, a large number of which are 10 years or more out of date. So they are extrapolations upon extrapolations. Something like 60% of deaths and causes of deaths are not registered. 35% of births are not registered. Therefore, those children under 5 don't legally exist. Therefore, it is very hard to direct and inform policy making to serve those who are at that edge of the network and beyond the edge of the network. And of course, it is the firm hope of everyone in this room and the panel, I'm sure, and everyone, that the ICT revolution, the mobile broadband revolution, will facilitate a data revolution for those who are at and beyond the edge of the network. And if it doesn't happen, I think they're going to remain too far beyond services. Particularly, I'd like to call out the GSMA's Connected Women campaign, and an initiative which is extremely important. Though we don't often hear about it as much, I found, on the continent as in some other regions. And it's addressing, particularly the importance of getting women more access, and also when they have more access, greater usage. And there's various policy constraints there, which would be good to talk a bit more about.
Obviously, we are also focusing not only on the South African view, but we also need to get clarity, Mr. Jarana, on working as a continental player. We need more inter-African interaction, especially when it comes to policy and controls. Before we venture into that, Dr. Gillwald, as one as Honourable Minister, give us perspective on that. Mr. Jarana,
Yeah, I wanted to just latch on what he has said. I think we have to keep the discussion almost at two levels. There is an individual access, where we know that there is still a lot more people that must be given access to these services. But I actually think that we also need to celebrate a lot more about the institutional level of how mobile broadband can help transform society, the continental institutional level. Today, we can track vaccines using mobile broadband anywhere in the continent, and you can improve efficacy of drugs and availability, making sure that we can transform health. These are beyond pilots. These are high efficacy solutions that are there that needs to be industrialized at scale. Healthcare, education, transforming agricultural value chain with a closed loop with M-Pesa at the end of the day, or any form of mobile payments. At an institutional level, that is, the mobile broadband is at the right point of maturity in Africa to transform society. What we need are scalable interventions. For example, being very clear about how we're going to make the continent leapfrog education. Government is already investing in education, but in traditional forms. there's an opportunity to leapfrog the whole evolution of libraries, infrastructure, and so on to be all virtual, all digital. And for me, it's a kind of conversation that needs to be held in parallel with the last mile coverage of individuals, because the biggest upswing of the mobile broadband in Africa today is in these interventions. And we've moved beyond pilots. These things are mature, scalable. What is needed is to mainstream them and give them industrial scale.
Before we follow up on the theme of working with our peers, I think, Minister, you might need to respond to the challenges as to why is there a delay in freeing up these interventions in order to enable mobile broadband to address the issues that Mr. Drummond and some of his other colleagues are seeing too?
Yes, the key thing really is that we know what is needed to enable this program. The real question is the spectrum.
The capital S word that everyone is nervous about.
The spectrum is a limited resource. From the policymaker, you must make sure that the way then you distribute the spectrum is in a fair and transparent manner, so that all the players can benefit, because these services ultimately must help us develop society. So we have to look at the context of Africa. I think that's what is important about the data. How do you mine the data? Who are the players? Who are the beneficiaries of this thing? So we have to improve that accuracy of mining the data. But in the South African content, we are quite aware of the challenge. We are working very hard to finalize the policy on spectrum, because first thing, you must have a policy so that everyone knows what are the games of this, what are the rules of this game. And that's what we are doing in terms of releasing of the spectrum. And we all know that most of our mobile are going to need high demand spectrum. And there is a commitment from government. And like I said, we just came out of a policy review, which was very helpful, where the industry itself were major players. Those are the principles we're considering now. So that we have, once we have a policy, everyone, even the newcomers and the incumbents, must know how are we going to deal with the spectrum. So there is that, yes, it's unfortunate that we have had a delay in the digital migration, which is locking a lot of our spectrum. But we're engaging our industry. How do we deal with that while there's still this delay? Once the policy is in place, we can start allocating so that people can plan, because we don't just allocate and people do the following day. They can plan how they're going to utilize their spectrum, taking into account that in Africa, the real challenge is that when it comes to urban areas, it's very easy to get all these services, broadband services. When you go to smaller towns and rural areas, the infrastructure, yes, is not good, but the African states are building infrastructure. But we have to encourage investment so that we don't create digital divide within nations and across nations in Africa, because that will have a most devastating effect. So those are the things really we're looking at in terms of policy. In our country, for instance, we have just launched what is called ICT Forum, where government, the industry, civil society is a formal forum to see how do we implement policies for the benefit of industry, for the benefit of our economic growth, so that we don't wait and speak across each other. We can sit and find solutions which will make sure that civil society benefits, the industry grows, and we as government are able to deliver the services. To me, the critical thing as we go to Africa, if we can just connect every school in Africa, because schools are in community, that will change the landscape of connectivity, particularly in terms of broadband. And that's where the issue of private-public partnership becomes very critical. Then how do we do that? Because that's what will empower the future generation. If you check who are the users of data in Africa, it's many young people, small young entrepreneurs. It's our children. They are the main users, more than us, the adults. So we have to empower that constituency, the young people, so that they can because they are the better users of this data. So they see more benefit than the aging group like me.
Some might challenge you on that one, Minister, but we'll have to pause it for the moment because we have to go to a short ad break. After the ad break, we get some perspective and questions from our audience members here, and we also delve into the issue of working together with our colleagues and partners on the rest of the continent and finding innovative solutions to the proposed issue regarding public-private partnerships. More from Cape Town right after this. Welcome back to the special live broadcast coming to you live from Cape Town, where we're focusing on the GSMA focus with regard to enabling or using mobile broadband as a catalyst to create a development program to find solutions to socio-economic ills in the country. We are going to continue with the second half of our conversation, and we will be taking questions from members from our floor. A reminder about the hashtag. It is hashtag MBB4DEV. That's MBB4DEV, mobile broadband for development. I want us to follow up on the sentiments that were shared with regard to creating that enabling environment and making the policies appropriate and optimizing the use of the infrastructure that we have. Mr. Hope, before we delve into how we can become continental players, maybe if you could give us more perspective if there are innovative solutions of making use of this infrastructure, as Spectrum has come up in the conversation, in order to address the needs, supply and demand regarding mobile broadband.
Thank you. We've seen that mobile broadband is not as ubiquitous as we would like it to be. So we'd like to roll out the networks to everyone who wants it. The existing operators, they've gone quite a long distance in providing the networks, but we still have that access gap. Now, how do we address it? There are several methods that we could use. One is that government could build a network in those underserviced areas.
We know that they don't have the money, right?
Right. So that's not a very viable option. Mm-hmm. Another option is for the existing operators to be incentivized to roll out networks, mobile broadband networks in those areas. So this could be done by providing subsidies or using license conditions. Another option is for there to be some sort of public-private partnership where government and the private sector get together and roll out the networks in those areas, where governments could facilitate the rollout by providing access to the rights of way, some of the facilities that government already owns in those areas. So, for instance, many times governments are partners or shareholders in the incumbent fixed line network. So that could be used in a public-private partnership. And those are just some of the options that are possible. I'd like to go back to one of the points Mr. Drummond made about the gender gap survey that the GSMA conducted earlier. Mm-hmm. So in Africa, the gender gap, that is the gap between the use of mobiles by males and females, it's about 13% overall, where males are 13% more likely to own and use a mobile phone. Now, some countries, like South Africa, Kenya, that gap is very low, or it's almost non-existent. But some other countries, you have a huge gap, and it's mostly to do with cultural issues, the position of women in society. So we need to address that also, that women are still not on an equal footing with men in many countries in terms of their earning power, in terms of in the home, who controls the finances. So it's something we need to address as a continent.
And that's something that technology can use as an enabler, quite frankly. You mentioned the incentives and the breaks to both Mr. Jarana as well as Dr. Gillwald. Are these incentives not working, or are they enough, or what else do we need as a guideline, Mr. Jarana?
So I actually think that the fact that you still have in some of the countries, I think you still have areas that are underserviced today. It talks to the economic model associated with those areas. So where there's demand business will go and meet and address that demand. But if the nature of demand is such that there's uncertainty about the level of returns and whether you can invest sufficiently and be able to recover your cost, then that's where the issue comes in. Yet what the industry is doing is investing a lot of R&D in finding low-cost solutions to cover those areas. So there are low-cost cells that cover small areas that are backhauled via satellite, because part of the challenges in mobile is your transmission backhaul, the network that carries your traffic back to the broader aggregation hub for internet. That becomes, those costs can be very astronomical in wide geographies like the DRC with a huge geographical area. So to address those costs, industry is investing in R&D, finding backhaul solution using satellite and low-cost geographical-based small cells to address that specific need. Yet, what's also very important is that if governments in those countries, in those provinces, address the demand side by saying we've got clinics, we've got hospitals, we're going to take up the service, and where there is a case for subsidies for the indigents, for example, you subsidize the demand side, then it makes the whole issue of viability less of an issue. So I think that the thing I want to underscore is that industry is investing a lot in making sure that the cost of the device is coming down every year in terms of smartphone, low-end smartphones. We're pushing that on the R&D side. Secondly, solutions that are going to deliver networks for smaller communities, low cost. Industry is improving economics so that this issue stops being an issue in Africa. And there's a lot of progress made, honestly. If I look at what we are doing in the Congo, what's happening elsewhere in Tanzania, there's a lot of innovation, but it needs partnership.
Let's talk about that partnership, because you mentioned our colleagues on the continent like Tanzania and Congo and the significant growth we've seen in Kenya on the back foot of technological innovation. To come to you, Dr. Gillwald, you've been focusing on 18 African states and combining or working together and finding some kind of cohesiveness along the ICT policies. Are we making progress with regard to this inter-regionalization of mobile broadband?
I don't think there's really very strong regional integration around harmonization of policies and things. I think East Africa has always been very cohesive. The markets are very fluid. People, the services, the mobile services, etc., are running across the various countries. So there are high levels of regional integration there. And I don't think one's seeing that to the same degree in West Africa, and I don't think one's seeing it to the same degree in Southern Africa. Although there are obviously are bodies in place trying to leverage the benefits of working on these things together. I think why they're not always as successful as one might want them to be is because essentially they still consist of several sovereign national countries who have different political economies, different agendas, etc. So in the initial stages of mobile development, where you simply took some kind of best practice model and liberalized your market, privatized your incumbent, set up a regulator, and it was all pretty kind of by the book, one could sort of reach kind of consensus on how that should happen. But I think in relation to a number of the points that have been made, I think we have to get a completely new perspective on how we do things. Things are very dynamic now. A lot of the provisioning that was happening by the state in our old telco models is now happening by multiple players who are sometimes vertically integrated, sometimes not, sometimes they're complementary services across things. So even our old ways of competition regulation require review. We require sort of much more looking at dynamic efficiencies in the market and what's enabling those to occur than just doing it sort of by the old book. So in relation to a number of the points that were made, I think we have to move beyond the way we've done things before. The issues, and I think the thing is, it can't be dependent on champions that we have in different countries. So in various countries we've seen, in Kenya, there was a moment in time, there was a permanent secretary, very, very active, cable developments, all sorts of things happen. Political cycles change, people are out of office, there's no institutionalization of some of these gains, and things. So one really wants to try and ensure, of course, the consultation is absolutely critical. We're trying to have democratic consultative processes that represent the will of the people. But I think we do have to also at the same time not move beyond, but institutionalize processes so that critical policies like spectrum don't become subject to discontinuities in political leadership or administrations or parties or whatever it is across the continent. And the whole issue of spectrum, I mean, it's absolutely critical to mobile being able to reach these developmental goals and contribute to economic growth, etc. The cost of not doing this, the opportunity costs of not doing this are so high. We saw it with the failure to introduce third-generation spectrum in India. Billions of dollars over 10 years that were not reaped by that economy. And so many would attribute to the inability of India to fulfill its vision of becoming the Silicon Valley of the East and all those kinds of things. Outside of Bangalore, there's simply not the kind of modern mobile environment that you would expect. We have to get these right. Spectrum is absolutely available. It's been in South Africa, 3 or 4 year delay on a previous delay as well. It simply has to be institutionalized so that the regulator, once the policy has been decided, the regulator simply can move ahead with that. In various countries, we've had similar problems. And if we really want to see the benefits of mobile broadband, we have to address this issue. There's a lot of experience. We know how it can be done in ways that get the necessary value out of the spectrum, and let's move on. If mistakes can be made, build in spectrum trading, build in things that can ensure that if there are value errors in the process that you have in assigning the spectrum, that these can be redressed over time. So I just wanted to I know that there were a lot of things that were raised previously, but I really think in this new approach, we have to treat these new technologies, we have to treat mobile broadband increasingly as a general purpose technology. We can't treat it any longer as something that is kept in order to deliver on health or to deliver on education or something. The only way you're going to get it to really take off is for it to be completely cross-cutting in society and be widely pervasive and used. And that's how we have to address it. I'm sorry, and I'm often having to say this on panels where we do have governments involved, but e-government does not stimulate demand. Nobody rushes out and buys a cell phone or an expensive service in order to get e-government services. What we do know from the research, and I should say that research, there's very limited research that is actually nationally representative demand-side data that understands what people are doing, wanting to use their phones for, what they're willing to spend, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the data we've heard is extremely problematic, including the gender data, which I'd love to come back to if we get the chance. But we have to, we have to address this in a very different way.
Mr. Jarana is sitting there and is very uneasy in his seat and actually wants to get back to you on that particular point.
Can I just say, the thing that does drive it is social networking. We know that social networking drives it. And so what government should be doing is saying, how do we exploit the fact that we have all these young people on social networks? That is how we access the education system. That is how we do
I'm going to have to ask you to pause there due to time pressures. Mr. Jarana and Mr. Drummond, your responses to...
Quickly, I think I'm on the point of e-government. And I think that we cannot be binary about this. If government goes online, there are a number of young people who go out of jobs. They have to apply for UIF. They have to travel from rural areas. They take 3 taxis in to come to file up and so on. So the government services that are addressing the major populace, once they are being made online, the demand will stimulate demand. And I'm not suggesting this is the only thing, but the people use social network for a purpose. Those who are on the social network, Facebook is more for lifestyle. We're saying for social economic impact, government must go online. We know of more people. And if you start to say you apply online for these services and the response is quicker in the back office, then when it's online, it's faster. More people are going to use it, and therefore people find the right use for their digital technology. And we think government is key. And it's not just government online, but government services being provided online to address social economic issues it's very, very important. And then bridging the divide in terms of time and space. Citizens that are staying far from the service areas, they need to have access to these services using mobile. So it's very, very important. Some people have to apply for lottery funding and so on, and they have to find ways of faxing, emailing. They've got mobile, they could apply. So I'm more to say, when government goes digital, when government goes online, demand will drive. So the last point I want to make around on this thing of continental integration, we talk about mobile services and internet. The big thing that's going to challenge us is going to be around data, cloud-based services that can be built in one country and be delivered across the continent because they address the similar issues. At the moment, data sovereignty, extraterritorial independent of states is creating challenges in terms of scalable interventions. So we need to look at policy congruence across the continent to say, if the solution is developed in Kenya and it addresses the same thing in South Africa, we should be able to access that without the fear that South African data is not protected. Bilaterals between Kenya and South Africa must be concluded to say, you'll protect our data. If you want it, you're going to get it. So that's how you get Africa going when you get to cloud-based services. So, yeah.
Sure. I mean, there's, again, lots been touched on here. One of the key drivers of, at least if it's not e-government, it's e-commerce. And for young people, it's particularly the entertainment sector and pop culture. And that's what people really want. That's what's driving a lot is video and demand for music and video. And that's why we've partnered, partly to promote the Connected Women initiative of the GSMA, in this initiative called With Strong Girls. So there's a song called Strong Girl being recorded by Judith Sapuma, Yemi Alade, Omatola, Vanessa Mdee, Victoria Kamani, amazing female artists from across the continent. So please download it at one.org and you can take the action. It's a hashtag Strengthy. And we're encouraging the AU, who meet next week, and the G7, who also meet next week, to agree policies to promote more access for women and girls to mobile broadband through this campaign. And the video and the sort of initiatives like it, we're hoping will increase the desire to connect and bring together the entertainment sector, which could be more Pan-African and could help maybe drive some of the market integration that you talked about. And we're also hoping that we can, through connecting some of the rising generation of African talent with global talent, help make sure that their voices are heard, not just in Africa, but around the world, so that they become voices who speak more internationally for the opportunities on the continent.
Well, we heard the issue of e-government being mentioned, obviously, and Minister, it would not be right if we don't let you respond to this one. Are we seeing a pickup in that, and will it take place from a South African perspective anytime soon?
Yes, no, it is picking up. It is one of the success area, Pascal, of PPPs in South Africa. The private sector, our telecoms have been, through their license condition, the incentives, investing a lot in this. And I had the opportunity to visit some of those rural schools which are connected. It makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference because it may be the only point of access in that community. Which then brings me to the issue of these incentives. Yes, we, in Africa, I think really we have to scale up the issue of this right of ways. The biggest challenge where it takes long just to get approval. I think it does stifle the investment, and we're really looking at how do we expedite, particularly at the local municipal level, these processes. The universal access funds, I think they've been successes. Sometimes we don't mention this, because it depends. If we use these universal access funds we levy from operators as part of the license correctly and use it to incentivize the operators to invest. I think in South Africa we've seen where we go and use the fund to upgrade the mobile operators network to broadband level. It is working very well. But it cannot just be limited to the levies we are receiving, because they are limited. The fund needs a lot of money. Somebody talk about checkbook. That's where we have to go beyond just the mobile or the telecoms operators. We have to look at the donors, if we have to look into Africa, to put money in those universal access funds, because that's what can cause the universal accessible services to all in Africa. So that's what really we will call upon, particularly even in this type of forum, that let's look at other innovative ways to increase these universal access funds, but make sure that the way we utilize them in a transparent manner which benefit the community. Thank you.
Government and private sector singing from the same hymn sheet. It does come as some relief. Dr. Gillwald, we'll come to you shortly in a moment, but I think it's time for us to take some questions or feedback from the floor, as there are some industry players here. If you do have a question, please raise your hand. A roving mic will make its way to you, and you can address the panel by introducing yourself, your name, and which organization you represent, and you can fire with your question. Any questions from the floor? I'm surprised you all don't look like a shy bunch, but that's okay because we've got a gentleman here right in front. We'll take two questions very briefly, and we'll get a response from the panelists as the microphone makes its way to you. Thank you so much, sir.
Hi, morning. My name is Larry Stone from British Telecom. Some common challenges, not uniform, but common challenges between different African states. I wondered, on the theme of encouraging best practice and sharing best practice across financing, infrastructure, policy, business models, what structures are in place to engender that sharing of best practice across countries?
Thank you so much for your question. So any other question? We're going for one more question from the floor, and then we get comments from the panelists. We've got a gentleman here at the far end. You can remain seated, sir, and just introduce yourself and the organization you represent.
Good morning, Craig Fredericks with the GSMA. We're seeing increasingly with the launch of the Sustainable Development Goals coming up in September in New York, the merging of different sectors. And just a question to the Minister is how, within the South African government, the Ministry of Telecommunications is now starting to interact and enable cross-sector discussions with Ministry of Finance, particularly, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health. We're seeing some good momentum. But I just wondered how governments themselves are thinking about this cross-sector unification and investment.
Thank you so much for your question, Mr. Fredericks and Mr. Stone. Let's pick up with Mr. Stone's question first, representing British Telecom. Structures for best practice, are they in place? Let's start with Mr. Hope, if you have a response to that.
Okay, thanks. What we find is there are some regional blocks across Africa. So in East Africa, Southern and West Africa, we have IACO. In Southern Africa, it's SADC, and the Telecoms Regulators Association, or rather the Communications Regulators Association, is CRASA. And we have a similar structure in West Africa. So they meet quite often, and they share best practice. They also develop draft regulations that each country can then adopt.
We'll leave it at that. Hopefully Mr. Stone is satisfied with that. He's got a bit of a frown on his face, but we'll come back to that one. Minister, you want to respond?
Yes. Of course, these regional, I want to confirm the regional structure is really engaging in sharing the best practices. But even at the AU level, there is now more commitment at the head of state level that we should create a platform, even at the regional level in terms of the AU. In terms of South Africa, how do we make sure that we deal with these things across sector? Our e-governance strategy is to connect all government offices, police stations, magistrate offices, health facilities, education facilities, and so on. So there's an approach. And in the infrastructure drive, which is coordinated at the presidency, which is very helpful, that's where we coordinate our efforts. My own department is really more of a coordinating department to make sure that our plans, they do talk to each other. Because when you can put the pipes, the key thing is whether the content is going to be there for people to access that. So we're encouraging the departments to develop the content we should run into this pipe. On the other side, we want to make sure that the public servants, all of them, they know how to utilize this so that for their own benefit and for the benefit of the citizens. So there is a stronger coordination. at a presidential level. I think at a continental level, what maybe is a best practice, even if you look at other developing countries, what has helped if the coordination is at the highest level. Presidency plays a key role to drive other ministries and other state agencies so they can have a common purpose. So that's the approach we are taking. Why we're doing all this as African states, we all know the importance of this internet revolution. We all know the benefits of this ubiquitous broadband to society. And we want to leapfrog as the African continent also in this development. And there is a biggest chance because it will change. It will change the health outcomes if people have access through these e-services and the broadband in the health services. It will change the educational outcomes. It change the socio-economic development of those communities. I often talk about, I love these stories about poor communities, where one of our mobile work with one of our agents upgraded just the towers in the most rural Transkei area. A lady who used to sell apples and fruit on the street, now because it's got access to internet, is selling services, is selling airtime, is selling electricity, and the incomes of those people in those rural areas have increased exponentially.
So there is a long-term benefit, Minister.
Yes,
unfortunately, we have to pause it there given the fact that we are live on TV. Both to Mr. Stone and Mr. Fredericks, thank you so much for your questions and participating in this discussion. To our audience members as well for listening in onto this particular topic. It does seem as though the key items have been clarified, ensuring that there is significant demand in the sector to drive down the costs, seeing that government and the private sector works together. But more importantly, we need clarity on the policies that are in place so that we'll be able to create an enabling environment to address our social needs. A big thank you to all of my panelists for joining us today and participating. The Honourable Minister of Telecommunications and Postal Services in South Africa, Mr. Siyabonga Cwele, Mr. Mortimer Hope, who is the Director for Africa at GSMA. We've got Dr. Alison Gillwald, who's the Director of Research for ICT Africa, Mr. Vuyani Jarana, Chief Officer at Vodacom Business, and Mr. Jamie Drummond, who is the co-founder of One.org. Thank you so much for joining us on this special broadcast, ladies and gentlemen, and your participation on social media networks. For CNBC Africa, I'm Gugulethu. See you next time.